Hey everyone, I'm Jimmy.
And I'm Jake. We're co-founders of AuthZed, a database and service for application permissions. Today, we're going to be using the AuthZed playground to model an example permission systems for you. The permission system that we're going to go through today is the GitHub permission system. This is one that people are familiar with and will really help highlight how easy it is to design and validate a permission system using AuthZed.
All right, let's get started.
All right, so here we are in the AuthZed playground. We're going to start from a basic RBAC example. This is visible in our playground. We can just load that up. I'm going to run through what the basic example is to start. So we've got the user. A user in AuthZed is just an object like any other. We've got a document, which is our basic thing that we're protecting. We've got a few relations. Remember, relations are the individual relationships between objects in AuthZed. So in this case, we can have a user that acts or has the relationship writer and a user that has the relation reader. And then we've got a few permissions. So we've got the edit permission, which is composed of all of the users with writer relation. And then we've got the view permission, which is all of the users with reader and anybody who also has the edit permission. So that's just basically how it's going to work. In order to model GitHub, I'm going to drop all of these comments first because we're at like a pretty high zoom just to make some more space. And then Jimmy is just going to tell us a little bit about what the different permissions are in GitHub and how that works. So yeah, Jimmy, like what's the fundamental thing that we're trying to protect in GitHub?
Sure, so GitHub is at its root a collection of repositories that have code stored inside of them. So fundamentally, the thing that we want to protect are repositories. Users then are granted access to repositories, and users then can often be placed in groups that can belong to organizations that can represent companies or teams or foundations for open source work. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, the simplest possible case is a user trying to access an individual repository. So starting with those as our primitives, we're going to look at types of things that you would actually want to do with a repository, and then what kinds of relationships users have to repositories, and then we can discuss how those two come together, basically, to create an actual permission system.
Cool. So based off what you said so far, I already added an organization object type and made it
Mhm.
possible for repositories to exist within an organization. But yeah, so let's talk about like what are the different kinds of things one can do to a repository?
So obviously you can create a repository, but that's an interesting case because the repository is already, we're already talking about an existing repository. So maybe that's not something we would model at this level. Maybe that would be modeled at a level of the thing that actually owns repositories, right? Um, so yeah, exactly. Organizations might have a permission that's called create repository. Um, and we can come back to that later, maybe when we want to flesh out organizations more in terms of like what relationships they can have. Um, but yeah, you can clone a repository. So git clone is the equivalent of downloading code to your machine. Um, what else can users do? Users can create issues on repositories. That's how you report bugs. They can create pull requests, which is how they can offer code to the repository. Um, they can merge pull requests if they're a maintainer. Um, they can push code directly to the repository as well.
You said
Um,
maintainer. What is the maintainer? A specific type
yeah,
of relation?
exactly. Yeah. So really what's actually helping me think of what these verbs even are, it probably is easier to take a step back and actually just think about the relationships first, because while it may be easy to be like, oh yeah, we have these requirements that are these actions. when I start thinking about what actions you can possibly do, my brain first jumps to like these like what kinds of users will actually be using this. Like, what are the things that like the owner of the repository is going to do? Um, so so there's obviously an idea of an owner, and then there are people that have like write access, and they're going to be like what I would call the maintainer, right? So there are people that decide what can actually modify the code, and then there's going to be passive users that are just able to read the code, right?
That's just called a
And
user.
that, yeah, I guess we could just call that a user.
What does GitHub call it?
Uh, I guess in GitHub, I feel like they just let you assign read access to a particular user. Um, so maybe it would just be like reader, right? I think reader is probably maybe the best description.
I mean, it should be a thing. So there's okay. If I pull up the roles drop down, I see read, triage, write, maintain, and admin.
Yep.
Okay,
So
so
I
let's
actually
do
am not sure what the triage role does in GitHub. I think that's relatively new.
reader.
Um, but I suspect that has more to do with like issues and things. When I think of triage, that's what I think of, going through the issues and maintaining issues. Um, which we could start getting into more and more depth with issues over time as well, because issues are almost kind of like an orthogonal feature to like modifying the code, for example.
Okay, so these are the different roles that I see in the drop down.
Yep.
So now let's map those to the different actions, right? So who can clone? I guess that's
So
uh,
readers, right? Anyone with read access should be able to clone.
but there, it's more than just the readers, right? It's also the basically everybody.
Yeah, it's pretty much everybody. Yeah, I can't see a world where like the only one that's kind of contentious would be triager, but I can't see a world where somebody's allowed to triage issues for code they can't see,
Let's see, it
right?
says can read and clone this repository, can also manage
Yep.
issues and pull requests. Okay.
Cool. All
Um,
right. So,
so web
so
actions, that would be, there's read,
yep.
that would be same list of people. Okay.
Mm,
Um, what else? We said clone, get actions would also be like push and pull, I guess, or clone is pull.
yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we could do that for the dichotomy, calling it like pull and push rather than clone and push, just so
Hmm.
it's clear that they're related. Um,
Let's just use their terminology.
yeah. Okay.
So
So in this
writer,
case, yeah,
read,
exactly. You
clone,
want
and
some kind of
push.
right maintainer admin access, right?
So people who can push are uh, writers and
Hmm.
everybody who can clone. No, no, that's not right. Not at all.
No, no. If we want to do that, we would do the inverse.
Yeah.
We actually want to just say writer, maintainer, admin here, and then we can actually then drop that. Yep, and say people that can push can also clone.
Cool. Yeah, that looks good.
Hmm.
All right, we've got these web actions. So the reader, having the read web action is the same. Can read, can read, can read, can read, can read. Yep, that looks good. Um,
Do we actually want to like take a step back and talk about the benefits of the thing that we just did, where we defined clone in terms of push? Um,
sure.
the reason why you'd really want to do this is because later, if you decide to change the definition of like who can push, it's really easy that like those changes will then percolate down to read access as well. So if tomorrow you decide to introduce a new type of relationship um, and add that to push, yeah, like exactly, we can add that just into push, and then by defining it this way, now clone just automatically inherits all of those users as also being able to have read access. So when you do things like this, it obviously makes less changes, less overhead, less like maintenance burden in general.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
So
Um,
okay.
so we've got read. Read, clone, open and comment on issues and pull requests.
Yeah, so these are going to be a lot of the triager stuff, right?
Well, it says readers can also open and comment on issues and pull requests. So this is actually reader, basically the whole big list.
Mm-hmm.
We can just do read. Anybody with read can also create an issue and create a pull request.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what else? Triage can read and clone this repository, can also manage issues and pull requests. So I guess manage would mean merge and delete.
Yeah,
Permission,
that's what it sounds
close,
like.
issue.
So one of the other, like, stepping back once again, one of the other benefits we have now to saying to actually creating these individual things, you might say that, like, hey, create issues, just read. So why wouldn't I just check the read permission when I want to create issues? But similar to our previous argument, if you actually create a permission called create issue, if that ever changes in the future and you actually want to actually reduce the scope of who can actually create issues, or it gets more complex, now you have a dedicated permission already that you were checking in your code. So rather than actually having to make any changes in your code, you could just modify a schema and populate new tuples into the system that would let the database understand then
Yeah, should we take a
the
minute and
change.
actually go and build some relationships?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. We've kind of just been in schema land, but if we have some example data in here, I think we can make this way more concrete.
Yeah, so just as a refresher, the way these relationships work are on the, we're building basically a directed graph from an object to a subject. So in this case, this relation means that repository objects can have a reader, which is a reader subject, which is of type user. So if we just start there, so if we say repository, give me a cool repository name.
AuthZed,
Sure.
right?
Yeah, I guess we can use our own
Yeah,
team.
let's do AuthZed Go, for example. Let's do our client libraries, right?
AuthZed Go. Okay. So we're going to say that AuthZed Go has a reader. And I guess, yeah, let's just set me up as a reader.
Mm-hmm.
So then we're going to do user Jake. All right, so we've just built our first relationship. So we're, again, just to recap, we're saying that this repository called AuthZed Go has a reader, and the reader is user Jake. Usually you would use like a user ID, like a GUID or a database row ID or some kind of stable identifier rather than these strings. But the strings will make it easier to see and reason about what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and then we said that we have a reader should be able to do a lot of these things, right? So a reader should be able to read, create an issue, but not close an issue, right? So
Sounds
let's
right.
go and set up some assertions. So we're going to say repository AuthZed Go. Yeah, if you see me making any,
Spelling mistakes,
yeah.
repository.
So what
Yeah,
we're
repository
is it also
is wrong. Yeah.
okay? Let's just do clone repository repod. Can't type. Clone, and we want that to be user Jake.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that should be true. So now we're just going to run our validation. Uh-oh, failed to validate. Let's see what mistakes maybe we made. Oh, right. These do not make sense anymore.
Yep. We just didn't reset it from last time.
Yeah, actually, this is a good page too. So this will go and compute everybody who has this particular permission. So if we
Mm-hmm.
change this to repository authZed go, and we did clone,
Yep.
this will compute everybody who is allowed to clone. And as of right now, the only one who's allowed to clone is me, because that's the relationship that we set up.
So the
right?
difference between the tab that we were writing the assertions and the last one is that you get to assert in this section, you get to assert things that you believe to be true or believe to be false, and then have the system check against that. While the last tab, the expected relations tab, you'll actually give it a relationship, and the system will exhaustively tell you um, what is actually possible there. So rather than having an individual assertion, it's telling you these are all the things that I know to be true about this particular relationship. Is that an accurate description?
Yeah, exactly. So I just went ahead and set it up so that you should also be, I'm trying to assert that you can also clone, but because we
Mm-hmm.
don't have any relationships binding you to this repository yet, it's actually not showing up that way, right? So it's saying that like you said that Jimmy should be able to clone and he can't yet. Um, so if
Gotcha.
we
That's because
go,
Jimmy just doesn't even exist, right?
right, so if we go and we give you admin access
Mm-hmm.
on the repository, which is, you know, very true to life. Now we can go back to our assertions, and if we run them again, it works. But now this one is failing to validate because it's saying, oh, I found extra things here. I found extra things here that weren't in your list, right? So it's saying user Jimmy. So if we just regenerate, now it brings Jimmy in as an allowed cloner. And just to see how this evolves over time, we can add some of the other actions. So what was it, like open issue or create issue?
Yeah, I can't remember if it was create or open that we had.
Yeah, create issue.
Yep.
Um, so generate repository, go. I don't know, let's just add one more. Close pull
Mhm.
request.
We should show off the compute and diff button as well.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
Because,
absolutely.
for
So,
example, we can remove one of these. Yep. And then ask the system to actually show us the difference. So we don't just have to overwrite everything. We can actually get the system to show us first, and then we can accept the change or revert it. So
all right.
just some extra functionality.
Yeah. It seems like everything's working so far.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to our schema and keep adding things. So we had the triager is able to manage issues and pull requests. A writer can read, clone, and push to this repository, can also manage issues and pull requests. So a writer can do everything a triager can do plus push. Um, so maybe we want to redefine. So push is a writer, maintainer, and admin. Okay, yeah, that seems right to me. Um, maintain can read, clone, and push to this repository. They can also manage issues, pull requests, and some repository settings. What are repository settings?
Yeah, exactly. We haven't even gotten into the whole world of settings.
I'm just going to throw manage settings.
Yeah, I actually think this is a really interesting subject to talk about in general when it comes to modeling your applications. Because, for example, GitHub can potentially model like manage settings as one particular permission and just say only admins or maintainers can actually modify any of the settings on a repository.
Right.
However, you might very quickly arrive at a situation where you have a pretty sensitive setting inside the options for the repository, like billing, for example. You probably don't want everyone with maintainer to be able to read the credit card out of the repository. Um, so you quickly arrive at a complete decision of what level of granularity do you want to have for each individual setting, or do you want to just have one option for setting? Do you want to break it into different sections of your settings? And this is entirely down to the application you have, the complexity you think you'll have in the future, and at least if you go on the more sensitive route, the more granular route, you will probably not have any issues in the future composing anything else or changing those permissions. But you may struggle if you go too general and then have to make things more fine grained, you'll actually have to end up changing code if you ever decide to make any changes to your permission system. So, like all things in life, it's kind of like everything in balance. If you're pretty early in your application, it might make sense just to have a single settings permission. But if you know that settings are a critical part of your application that you're building, and it's going to be one of the differentiating features or one of the features that your users are going to care about the most, you might actually want to bite the bullet and be far more specific ahead of time, rather than having to make changes in the future that will be painful.
Yeah, so for the fine-grained, I'm just going down. I just have the repository settings open, and I'm just going down the tabs on the left and showing what those might look like to be fine-grained. But we don't have to add them.
Yeah, and so like for example, on GitHub settings page, yeah, you have all the tabs on the left-hand side, but that's not even that's just sections, right?
Yep.
You could go down to the granularity of the individual like checkboxes if you really wanted to. But like I said, everything in balance, that might not actually make that much sense, but it is absolutely something you can model.
Yep. I think it's okay to just use sensitive settings and regular settings for our example of how to do GitHub.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's pretty reasonable. Or maybe break it out one more and have billing, right?
Okay, sure.
Because lots of SaaS software also have like a billing aspect.
Billing. And that would just be admins, right?
Yeah, yep. Or theoretically, we could create a new relationship that is billing admin if we just wanted someone to pay the bill.
Oh, that's a really good point. Would a billing admin exist on an individual repository, or would that exist at a higher level?
Yeah, I think that
Actually,
you
there is no
probably.
billing on the repository as I'm looking at it.
Yeah, exactly. I actually think that this depends app to app. GitHub, I'm fairly certain, does billing on the organization level. So maybe it's time to dive a little bit more into organizations, because we've kind of exhausted a whole bunch of different permissions and relationships for repositories. I suppose we haven't exhausted them, but it might actually help us kind of suss out more when we think of the context of kind of where repositories live in the application. So that's typically owned by an organization, right?
Yep. All right, let's do it.
All right. So organizations have members, right? Actually, before we forget, we should probably put down billing admin, right? It's
Yeah,
the reason why we're here.
billing. Wow. So that would be a billing admin, and that would be a
Hmm.
user.
Yeah, I believe you would want a user
Okay.
for that.
So then we have manage billing, and that would be the billing admin, or what?
Or an actual admin, I think, right?
Yeah. Let's see what the different roles you can have. I see member and owner as direct entities on the
Hmm.
organization. So relation owner, relation member. I don't see a billing admin. So while that is a useful thing for us to talk about as an example, if we're modeling GitHub, I think we should probably drop it and switch it
Yeah,
to
we
owner.
can just say that owners do that, right?
Yeah,
But
let me just make sure what the different roles are.
sure.
So yeah, I only see owner and member. So that would be an
Yeah,
owner.
and I suspect that the reason why there's no such thing as a billing admin on GitHub is more of a question of legacy, right? I suspect they created owners, and then eventually somebody probably asked for this feature, and it was too late for them. They went too general, and they don't have a nice granular permission that was modified billing settings. They just had owners that did everything.
I guess we would all three of us would be admins, or you and I, just for this example, can be admins.
Hmm.
Owner, not admin. Okay, and now let's go and make sure that that allows us to edit the billing. And manage billing.
So we should see our two relationships. Do you want to compute the diff?
Yep, there we
Yep.
go.
I guess it sorts it alphabetically, right?
Yep. All right. Yeah, so it's saying that you and I can manage billing. But wait a minute, if we're owners of the organization, how come I'm not allowed to close pull requests? As an
Yeah,
owner
that's
of the
pretty
org,
interesting.
shouldn't I be able to do that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we actually have fleshed out any connections really between the repository and the organization. We've created a single relationship which says an organization can own a repository, right? But have we actually considered that how that affects any of the repository's permissions, right?
Oh, well, I know one thing. First of all, we didn't set the
We didn't note
relationship.
it
Yeah.
exactly.
So
So
repository, AuthZed go,
right now, we basically have a
attention,
repository floating in space and an organization floating in space, but we don't have
organization,
an
AuthZed.
organization that owns the repository.
All right. So that should fix it, right?
Hmm.
Wait a minute.
Right, yeah, there's no difference.
Hmm. Right. So down
So,
here, we're only talking about the relationships that are directly on the repository. But if we
hmm.
want to consider relationships on the organization, somehow we need to change these to go through the organization, right? So,
Yeah, yep. So there has to be some way for us to talk about the actual organization that owns this, because how else are we going to say that the admin of, or sorry, the owner of the organization should be able to do things on a repository?
okay. All right, let's do, yeah. So should the owner be allowed to do anything?
It seems like the owner should probably be able to do absolutely everything, right?
All right, owner. So I'm gonna add this a bunch of times then.
Yeah. Um, and then I guess I can explain a little bit about the syntax. Um, so the organization, just like you can see kind of with the syntax highlighting, organization is the same color as all the other relationships. We're treating it as a relationship. But by using this arrow operator, we're actually saying collect up all of the objects that have the organization relationship and then look at this relationship on those objects. So when we say organization arrow owner, we're saying get all of the owners from all the organizations that have the relationship organization to this particular repository.
Now, owner here is a relation. Do we want to, is it okay to reference a relation or do we want to reference a permission?
So this is actually, I think this depends, right? We might want to reference a permission on the top level of the organization, or we might want to only purely do relationships. I think in this case, it makes probably more sense to do it based on the relationship, right? Um,
Yeah, I think so. Um,
but you could see a world where an action on a repository, we just want to say, does this person have admin on the org that owns this, rather than saying, do they have the relationship? We could say like if they actually, if we flesh out organization more, we might want to not inherit from owner, but we might want to say, if you can edit the org, you can also like edit a repository. Like if you can manage the settings on the org, you can also manage the settings um, on a repository, because that might simplify our life just in terms of what the inheritance model looks like between those two. But your application might actually have completely different use cases where it doesn't actually make sense to inherit those relationships. like maybe you only want maintainers to be able to do certain things on the repository settings. So you actually don't want everyone that has org, the ability to manage settings on an organization, to be able to manage all the settings on the individual repositories. I don't think GitHub makes that distinction, but I think it's important to note that you can actually completely make this decision independent of the relationship between the repository and the organization.
Yep. So it did bring it in, and then it found out that, for example, you can close pull requests via having two different relationships. You're the
Gotcha.
org owner and also a repository admin. I think now this is kind of a boring tab because both of us have all permissions. So we should probably add another person to our repository. Just keeping with our J theme. All right, yeah, so that makes sense. The reader can do, oh, I made them an admin. Let's make them a triager just to see what happens. All right, so they can clone, they can close pull requests, they can create issues, but they cannot manage billing on the org. They can so far do everything on the repository, but let's add something that the triager shouldn't be able to do, which is push. Right?
You've misspelled repository.
Again.
Yep.
All right.
Cool. Let's see what this one generates.
Yep, that looks good to me.
Yep, Jessica's not in the set of users that can push, right?
Yep. All right, cool. What can an organization member do? Is that a thing?
It is indeed a thing. So here's actually a really interesting thing. Members might not necessarily get access to all of the repositories, right? That might be true. That might not be true. I'm actually not sure if GitHub makes the distinction there. Surely, if you were developing an application that was an analog to GitHub, you might have a different design decision here than necessarily what GitHub does. I believe that they do get read access.
I think what's happening, well, I'm not sure. I think what's happening though is that they're using it for billing.
Just remember that is true. I know their billing does work. The per seat aspect of GitHub billing is based on members in the organization. But if you have a private organization, right? Or sorry, if you have private repositories, having member on the organization should give you access to those repositories. When in doubt, read the docs.
Yeah. A member can create repositories. Really?
That's
look,
interesting.
Billing managers.
Aha, so they do have billing managers. Here's some more permissions for members.
Oh my goodness.
They can create teams. Yeah, they can do a lot.
Wait, what's a team?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we haven't even begun to model teams, which actually is probably yet another relationship on the organization, a new type of object so that we're going to have to define that an organization has a relationship to.
Let's go back.
A team is probably going to have a relationship to an organization, right?
Let's go back and close the loop. Remember we skipped create repository because we said it probably exists at a higher level?
Gotcha. Yep, that makes a lot of sense.
Create repository. And that is an owner plus a member, it turns out, but not a billing manager. And then we don't have a delete repository here, right?
No, we don't actually. Yeah.
delete.
It's actually interesting. I could see arguments for having delete repository also be a thing on the organization and not on the individual repository.
But I think an repository admin can
Hmm.
delete a repository, which means that you would want to do it at the repository level.
It's true. I'm saying you could in such a world potentially not want that. If I was running my business,
Oh,
uh,
sure. But for GitHub,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, if I was running a business that needed to be extremely heavily audited or something like that, I wanted a paper trail of everything. I might actually want to control the policies around deletion at the organization level, for example. I don't think that's how GitHub works, but this is another one of those opportunities where what makes sense for your application might differ.
let's just pick a few of these other things where, well, teams. Yeah, I mean, we haven't done anything with teams so far.
Yep. So do we want to try to introduce the concept of teams?
Sure.
I suspect that will have a rippling effect, right, on a lot of the permissions we've already defined.
Okay. So we've got a team. Um,
You might want to reopen the GitHub Docs tab we just had
yeah.
open, right? Because team maintainer permissions on the left hand side, maybe.
Oh, team maintainer
There you go.
permissions.
This might have another grid like that.
Oh, a team maintainer looks like it's
Oh,
an
interesting.
organization level thing.
Interesting. So this could be another type of relationship you can have with an organization.
Like that.
Hmm.
What are the roles within a team? Are there roles?
Um,
Yeah,
well, there's
there's
a maintainer,
maintainer
but
and member.
yep. We must know that maintainer exists, right?
Well, I think this team maintainer is an organization level thing, and this
Hmm.
maintainer is scoped to a specific team.
Hmm.
Relation, so member. Yep. Okay. Can it? Well, I'll hold that question for later because that's another can of worms. All right. What? So what can a team do? Why would I want a team?
So it's probably for delegating access to groups of users, right, within an organization. So what happens is your organization grows. You have now like instead of 10 people, you have 100 people.
Hmm.
100 people have different roles within your organization. And what you want to do now is assign permissions in bulk rather than having to add each person individually, right?
Hmm.
So it's effectively, in my mind, kind of like a proxy object for users. What you would do is assign a user to a team, and that would then imply a bunch of permissions on repositories for every user in that team.
That might be a little premature. All right. So you're saying like these roles should also be able to be teams?
Yeah, exactly. I think you should be able to say that it's either a user or a team because a team is a collection of users.
Like, can I make a triager a team? Let's see.
So I think there's a couple different things you could do here. You could give access. You could say it's a user or a team, or we could follow relationships all the way through to resolve to users. I think it might make sense more to represent the team here.
Well, yeah, I think if I go to like the access page for one of my repositories, I see that for a team, I can set the role to any of these things. So
Gotcha.
I think this is the right way to model it, to at least to re-implement what GitHub has done.
Yeah. Do we want to describe kind of like the syntax that's happening right now? So it was clear before we were saying that the relation reader has a type of user, like only users are the objects that can have this. But now we're using this pipe operator to say or a team. So now we can say now when we write our relationships in the second tab, we can say that a user has a relationship reader to a repository, or we can actually reference a team and say a team has a relationship reader to a repository.
So one interesting thing that I just thought of is that these are users and these are teams, but how do we talk about the users on a team?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of have these relations already. Yeah, exactly. Or there's yet another question of how how meta do we want to go with teams? Do we want teams to also have a similar type, or we say a team maintainer could be a user or another team, or like we could actually make teams entirely recursive, right, or self-referential.
Yeah, so what I'm doing here is that I'm saying that we actually want this relation should always be
Mm-hmm.
pointing to a group of users. So I'm saying that we're going to have the users here
Mm-hmm.
be like these are obviously directly users, but these I'm now saying we don't want to point to the team itself, but we want to point to the members of the team. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Yeah, that does make sense, right?
Yeah.
Because the team isn't the thing we care about. We want the users that happen to be members of the team.
Yep. Okay. Should we create a team in our test data?
Yeah, I think so.
Organization, or no, team support engineers, maintainer. Give me a name of Ivan. Okay, so
No
now
longer
we've
following the J theme. We've now moved on reverse
uh,
alphabetically. So
I've run out
now
of
we'll
J
do
names.
all I's now. I'm gonna run out of names that begin with I far quicker than J.
Yeah. I need another name.
Ian.
Ian, there we go. All right, so now we've got these teams. We need to give the team some permissions. So support engineer should probably have what level of access on this repository?
Yeah, at a minimum, they need to be able to read it to field tickets, but I'm sure that you will also receive tickets to that will require modification of things as well. Um,
I mean,
it can
this
be
is sort of
tricky.
like a philosophical discussion for the individual like implementer of GitHub. So we don't really have
Yeah,
to,
exactly.
like at our org, we could say that support, we really trust our support engineers, so we're going to give them maintainer.
Hmm.
Support engineers. And now here we're going to use member. So we're going to say that the members, people who have the member permission on this team are considered maintainers of the repository. Sound good?
Hmm.
All right, let's see what that does to our. Yep, so Ian and Ivan got clone, they got pull request, they got create issue, and they got push. That seems fine to me. Okay. I remember reading something in the permissions about being able to change a team's name. A team maintainer at the org level was able to change a team's name. So I think the maintainer of the team plus the organization's.
Yeah, we haven't even talked about
Oh no.
how teams have an organization.
Okay. So the organization's, let's see, we probably want to do team function change team name. And these are team maintainers. So at the org level, if you want to change a team's name, you need to be on team maintainer. From the team's perspective, if we're looking at a particular team, then we want to say, no, change team name, right? So anyone who can change the team names at the organization level, or anybody who is a maintainer of this team.
Yep.
And then change. I'm gonna
Yeah.
do
So
something here.
we had this discussion the last time we used the arrow on repository. Remember, we decided that for repositories, it made sense to actually reference the owner of the organization directly. But in this case, we've actually decided we care about the permission more than actually the individual role that the user has on an organization. And this is more flexible because the organization might change what it thinks the requirements are for someone to change the name of a team. They might say billing admins tomorrow should have the ability to change team names. And that change will actually not affect the definition of team whatsoever. We won't have to make any changes there.
All right, let's see what comes out when we do team support engineers change team name. So Ivan, right now, as the maintainer of the team, is the only one allowed to change the team's name. That doesn't seem right, does it?
No, it doesn't seem like it's inheriting, right?
Organization, change team name. I know.
We haven't made the organization own the team.
All right, now let's see. Yeah, there we go.
Exactly. Yep. So previously we had a team floating off in space, and it was not a team that was under the AuthZed organization.
Now you mentioned teams being in other teams.
Yeah, this is where we could go pretty crazy, right? I could definitely see scenarios where you support team is actually a member of the engineering team, right? We have a team that represents all the different kinds of engineering roles.
So let's change this. Instead of being organization, let's change it to parent.
Mm-hmm.
So now your parent can either be an organization or a team.
Yeah, that's interesting because of the change here, right?
Yep.
So not all parents are going to have the change team permission though. Oh, actually,
they will.
they will actually by naming that. But what happens in the case where those names don't align? Because now we've got an implicit naming aspect that both the team permission and the organization permission have the same name.
Yeah, so they're polymorphic in this case.
Mm-hmm.
So all parents have this change team name permission on them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what happens if we were to change that? What happens if we called it just change name, because we don't need the word team in there? Obviously, we are, like, we're talking about teams.
Yeah. So now, since they're no longer polymorphic, we lose all of the, well, we don't have that permission anymore at all.
Yeah.
But if we changed it
exactly.
to
yeah, rename it to just change name. Yep. And so now when we look at this,
yeah, we still get the same results, and that's because we're referencing the organization level role.
Mm-hmm.
But if we added another team as the parent,
exactly.
So that's what you were talking about. Let's do team.
So yeah, because the names still are the same, we're getting all the same results. Yeah, we could call it like EU support or something like that, like EMEA, like NA, right? I'm actually thinking about making a subset of support engineers.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, that might be easier since we already have data in there.
Yeah, support engineers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's going to need a maintainer. Actually, it doesn't need a maintainer as a subteam.
Mm-hmm.
Give me a name
Iona.
like that.
Yep.
Give me a support
I'm gonna
engineers
struggle to come up with another one now.
parent.
Iggy.
The parent is a team.
I see. Yeah. So in this scenario now, we're saying that the EMEA support engineers is actually has the parent of just support engineers, so it's a sub team.
Yeah, and now let's see who can do. Oops. Let's do EMEA support engineers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So in this case, there were no people who
Yep.
can change the name, and that
Which
was
that makes sense.
because of
Yeah.
this. Its parent doesn't have a change team name permission or relation, so this dead ends for the EMEA subteam, making it polymorphic.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if that gives us. All right, there we go. So now the EMEA support engineers basically inherit all of the change team name from their parent. And then, of course, their parent also computes its change team name permission from its parent. So we're getting people at the org level, and then we're getting people at the direct parent team level. But because we don't have any maintainers on this subteam, we're not getting anybody at that specific lower level.
Mm-hmm. We only have the direct member, which is Iona.
Iona. Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Teams can still be part of repository roles, so I think that's good. Anything else we need to model with respect to teams?
Hmm. Yeah. Is there anything else we need to change for repositories? That's what I'm trying to think of. I feel like we've kind of flexed a lot of the different relationships and like how organizations and teams and repositories are interacting. Um, hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so we kind of lightly touched on the recursive aspect, right? So we did add this parent. Is there anything else? Like, should we try doing maintainer? Could also be a team potentially. Like, when do you think this breaks down? When do you think it's valuable to actually use recursion? When do you think it's not valuable to use recursion? Um, I'm not personally even sure if GitHub allows you to make subteams, although we've now demonstrated it.
Oh
Just
yeah, they
because I think
definitely
it's
do.
particularly useful. Oh, they do? Awesome. I actually have not tried using that.
Yeah, that was a thing that they added. I don't know, maybe 3 years ago, something like that.
Cool.
Which finally let which finally let middle managers model their org chart perfectly in their GitHub
I see.
organization.
Hmm.
All right, I don't know. I think we've run a little long. This is probably enough to see how to get started building something complicated like GitHub.
Cool.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the video and learned a lot about what it looks like to model a permission system in AuthZed's Playground. You can find the co-developed schema that we created today and the accompanying Playground link.
Awesome. And also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter and keep on the lookout for future videos where we're going to be developing schemas similar to this, but also taking the next steps and showing you how to take that into production and what it's like to actually run a service that depends on AuthZed in production.